Howdy, I'm Matt, and this is my LTE Rambler RS. What I would like to do in this video with you is to give you a full overview to everything which I have learned about this model from front to back. And you may notice that it is a little bit war-torn and it has been modified, and the reality is that it does require modification, and in short, it's not a bad model. I've said this all along, even with if we put the issues with the manufacturer, and I presume their representative, which have been absolutely appalling, to one side for a moment and focus upon the model, is the model itself has required a little bit of work just to get it to fly straight continuously, and has required one or two minor modifications, but in the scheme of things this isn't the worst model we have ever seen, and it's definitely not the worst model we will ever see again in the future. And again, I will stress, putting the manufacturer and the brand and its representatives to one side for a moment, it's not a bad model. So with that said, let's work our way from the front to the back and see what you can learn about what experiences I've had with the LTE Rambler RS, so that if you were to ever go on and purchase one, that you can learn from everything which I've been and learned. So the best place for us to start is with the nose. Now you have to excuse that wire, that's my charging lead for the camera which I put in the front. The front grille, if you look closely, it looks like the front grille which came with it standard. So if you had a kit turn up, that's what it would look like. Now the thing is that I've been and taken some Depron foam and used that grille as a template and then blocked in this nose. Now the reason why I've blocked in this nose is that actually what I'll do is cut to a clip. And before I cut to the clip, look how far the water has got back into this fuselage, and I actually found it back on the flight controller. So let me cut to that a moment and you'll understand why.
Quick observation, I've had a couple of flights with this one to get it trimmed in. I've got quite a lot up on that one. Yeah, if I show you there, quite a lot of up, and a fair amount of up on that one as well. This one's up further because of the torque roll of the motor. But the observation which I've had is that this front nose area, I'm going to get rid of this grille. There's a 3D printed version, because if you look in here, this battery and all the way up in the front of the model is sopping wet. So every time you land, water is just getting thrown straight in there, and it's ending up in the front of the model. So I am definitely going to cover that up on the front because it's just too much moisture getting in there. And imagine if it was raining, that would be horrific. So yeah, definitely going to cover that one up.
Yeah. So you kind of get the issue now with not only having such a large air vent in the front, is that if you land in wet grass or on the beach, potentially sand or sand dunes, so you might be in the desert for example, that's just going to fill up with dirt in absolutely no time at all. Water literally went straight through and then you'd back up literally right back here on the flight controller, which is just there. So I would strongly suggest that you can 3D print these. If you look on Thingiverse, there's plenty of these available for you. Or very simply, just use a little bit of Depron foam or an old bit of model just to block that up, and then you can tailor the nose to your own requirements. This one's set up for a Runcam 3S or 5, or maybe a session size camera, and that does seem to work out quite well. The camera itself down here, because it's on the bottom, it does also get wet every single time you land in wet grass, and to be honest, it doesn't matter if it was up there, it would still get wet. It's just because it's just a nose which will suck up anything when it goes in. Now, also staying with the nose, we need to go to the rear of the model, because if you didn't know, and I will cut to a clip on that in a moment, is that I had to modify the rear fin, and I feel that one of the reasons why you need to put a physical restraint on this fin at the back, so either put a pin like this in the back of the model to physically restrain that lid from coming off, or maybe some fiber tape for example to stop this popping off. I do feel that not only was the magnets being so poor, the size of the nose in here, so air getting rammed in the nose, combine that with the knacker duct on top, which is absolutely enormous, is creating a very large pressure underneath this hatch, because the air vent at the back, if I turn this over, you'll agree, compared to the size of the potential nose area and the knacker duct on the top is absolutely tiny in comparison. And I always remember a couple of slope sawyers telling me when it came to the cooling of a model is that whatever size hole you have to let air in is that you need 4 times the hole on the back. So no matter yes, we do have quite a large hole there, but it's not big enough in comparison to the stock size of the bottom feeder catfish like nose which is on the front of the LTE Rambler, which is ramming air in there again with this huge great big knacker duct on top, is creating a back pressure in there because the air just can't get out. So that's 2 reasons why I would strongly suggest that you change or modify the nose of your LTE Rambler, because everything which I've just mentioned a few moments ago. Right, moving on into the battery bay. Now, I have found this model a little bit weird, as in that this model really, some models you can pop the battery in there roughly in the right place. Mini Talon, for example, absolutely fine. It doesn't matter if it's a centimetres forwards or backwards of the centre of gravity, it will still fly absolutely fine. The LTE Rambler is extremely sensitive to the CG, so what I would strongly suggest is that if you buy one of these or own one, is that every single time you make sure you get that battery in exactly the right place. And to do that, a very simple tip for you is that I've been and put some drawing pins, sorry, not drawing pins, just clothespins there in the CG mark, and that means that every time I get to the flight line, if I turn this one back over, I can then put my fingers underneath and make sure it's balanced. Such a simple modification. It just means that every time you get there, you can check it, make sure the CG is right, and remember, put the lid on, make sure your camera's in the front, etc., and then just double and triple check the centre of gravity, because this one is absolutely no fun if it's even nose heavy. I've not flown it tail heavy, thankfully, and I frankly don't want to either. Nose heavy, atrocious. So be very aware of the centre of gravity on this model. It's not like other models which are very forgiving. This one is definitely not forgiving. Also, talking about forgiving, I'm absolutely shocked that the same designer would make the same mistake multiple times. And what I mean by that is that the designer who made this model made the original Dart XL, and one of the major issues with the Dart XL was that you would land the model and the nose would snap off, and you have to admit the size of this nose, which is also one of its great positives, is absolutely huge. Look at the size of my hand compared to the size of that battery. It is absolutely monstrous. And one failed launch or a failed landing, or you clip a tree or something like that, is that this nose area would be very weak. And a very simple way to modify that is that if you look in there closely, you will notice that there's some 4mm carbon rods going down the nose, and I am 100% sure now, after stuffing this model in the ground multiple times, that those rods are the only reason why the nose of this model is still intact. Okay,
that's how bent that battery is.
Wow.
So that's how hard I went in the ground, because
Yeah.
they've got metal plates in them, haven't they?
Yeah.
And that nose is absolutely fine. If I go and get the lid from behind, it was all just because the fin flew off the back.
Yeah. Oh, it definitely hit your prop.
Yeah, you can see it's been chewed.
It's been nommed.
Yeah,
one thing which you will notice is that I've made this little servo catch just here. The hole for the GPS wiring was the wrong way round, and what I had to do was modify the fin and cut out that little hole just there, so when I push that in, that the wires, the GPS wires, are actually going out the back there, and by taking that little clip out of the vertical stabilizer, it still works perfectly fine, is that now means that the cable's run directly down. I was a little bit surprised by that, especially the size of that wire in there was meant for a larger GPS puck, and many of them have the compass underneath, so I was a little bit surprised by that. If we think about the Olber bird, for example, from Finwing, that's exactly what they did for theirs. They had a little chunk cut out of the little nose piece in there, which restrains the vertical stabilizer, or the hatch in their case, and that works out really well. So I had to modify that because the hole for the GPS wire was in the wrong place. At Actually, that turned out to be a bonus because all I did is that in the kit there were 2 antennas, plastic tubes, just chopped off about 10 mils of that plastic tube, screwed in a old servo control horn, and what that now means is that this model does have a bad habit of ejecting the lids and flying the tail off. So I now have a very simple physical restraint on the lid to stop the lid popping off. And while we're on the topic of lids popping off, I also use a large pin to go in the rear here of the model to stop this rear fin from flying off, because you saw that flat spin earlier, and that's because negative air pressure, so much air pressure getting in here, pushing that off, and weak magnets in the model, and this flew off, and that was not fun. I think I kept it in the sky for about 44 seconds. Could not believe it. Any experienced pilot may have kept that in the air for a little bit longer, but yeah, that was quite a wild ride. Now, staying with the rear fin, you will notice that I have modified my rear fin. One fine thing which I did find with the model, imagine this is the LTE Rambler, is that it was hunting in the sky. I've probably put a clip up there in the top left hand corner and you'll see it wandering in the sky. A very simple resolution to this was that I added 4 centimeters, 40 millimeters, about an inch and a half or so of Depron foam at the very top, and then tapered it down. Oh, a massive tip for you is that if we imagine that this piece of cardboard is a piece of Depron, all I did was just sit that in on top, trace around the edge, and then just did 4 centimeters on top, and then you can mold it in nicely, and so it makes a really nice job of that. That's how I made mine. That single modification not only pissed off the creator of this model, which is a topic which we'll get to in a moment, and the professionalism of LTE as a company and their representatives have been absolutely appalling, or because I modified their model to fix a absolutely blatant issue with the model, with it hunting, like I said, in the sky. Very distracting when you're flying FPV. That has resolved it enough for you to not notice it during FPV flight, but when you look back at your HD footage on the front, you can still see the nose hunting in the sky. So there are other issues with this model, although that does dampen it absolutely massively and make it perfectly flyable. You'll just notice it in your HD footage, especially if your HD camera doesn't have any form of stabilization in there. You will still spot it if you look for it, although you have to look for it. Okay, that's the difference there. Now, the rear area of the model, the LTE Rambler, is absolutely massive. I would have personally liked some options for different flight controllers, although that is just me being picky. It would have nice to have been the 36mm square holes, for example, so that you could just put in a normal size flight controller. I am using the Maytech F765 wing flight controller in there. You'll see it's completely lost. It doesn't matter if you're using Pixhawk, a large flight controller like this, a little micro one like an F411 WSE, or even an Eagle Tree Vector, that would fit in here absolutely fine. There's space for, that's a 40 amp ESC, a traditional plain ESC, and that fits in there perfectly in the back of the model, and there's still plenty of area there for air to escape. Although do take in the comments which I mentioned earlier, and I do think I am just going to put a little bit of sellotape underneath that top lacquer duct on the lid up here, just to try and tame some of the air which is going into this model, because yes, we do require cooling inside of these models, but not that much and that much in there with no air for it to escape. So moving on is that you'll notice that I did put the plastic fins in here. I think they do have a positive effect, although however little effect they do, anything to help the model with the hunting is always a good idea. And there's also some vertical fins or horizontal fins, yeah, horizontal fins here in the nose. You got to be honest, combined with the stickers, they do look really, really good. Now, turning this around and taking a look at the motor mount, unfortunately you will see that my motor is hanging off. I did notice about 3 flights in or 3 landings in, is the top right motor screw hole did come loose, although I just tightened it back up with a Phillips and it seemed fine. And then this morning, in fact, I'll cut to that footage if I've still got it. I came in straight and I just think I was super unlucky and it literally ripped the motor mount off. I can't say anything too bad about the plywood which they used. It's not a bad plywood. There was a model here, the Sonnet model binary, and the plywood which they used was like cheese. It was so soft, it was ridiculous. This is not the same stuff. This is a half decent size, half decent quality piece of plywood in there. I just think realistically, if you've got the opportunity, then I would definitely suggest that you change or add even more plywood to that, so you thicken it up maybe with some 6mm plywood, or if you've got access to a 3D printer, maybe PETG might be an option in there, or ABS, or dare I say it, even nylon might even be an option. If those of you worried about temperatures, it could also be an option back here as well. So I do need to modify mine, and I will be replacing it with 6mm plywood on the back. So yeah, you have called it on a day where I've ripped the motor mount off. I can't remember the last time I ripped a motor off a flying wing before, so I am a little bit bamboozled by that, but it might have just been because of the weakened screw hole on the back from a previous landing, so that just may be a combination of factors which have drawn up and ended up where we are today. And yes, I do have the brake set on there, and it still did it. Now, a design choice with the Rambler was to have the servos on the bottom of the wings. Now, you'll notice that I mentioned that was a design choice. I personally would have preferred, and I'm sure you would have, preferred the servos to be on the top of the model. Now, it doesn't look as pretty, so if we turn this back up the other way around, this model would not look as pretty if we had the servos on the top. So aesthetically, less aesthetically pleasing. However, you will notice by the sheer amount of dirt and grass which is wrapped around that control rod, or push rod specifically, these pick up cut grass left, right and centre. In fact, I've probably already cut to a photo and this model is absolutely covered in cut grass. Look how well it's been collected in here in the control horns. Because they are on an angle, which you would want them to be on an angle, so the servo's in the right direction, so there's no differential, blah, blah, blah. They just pick up so much dirt. So imagine you're landing in grass, it's going like that, it's hitting that and then dragging it up to there to the end, okay? You need to be aware of that, and again, personally, I would have preferred the servos to be on the top of the model, something which I actually mentioned in the unboxing of the LTE Rambler originally, and I've proved the point numerous times. These just pick up so much dirt, it's unreal. You will also notice that these are green. Why are they green? The push rod themselves is not a bad material. It's definitely not made of cheese, but they were very, very flexible. What I did was just take some, let me grab it here from the side, just grab some, ta-da, heat-proof tubing, like so, grab some carbon rod and some CA glue, fed that down, put some carbon rod in there, use the blowtorch to tighten it up, and that has now made the control rods super, super stiff. I did feel that they were perhaps a little bit flimsy for this model, so I went on and modified mine. Howdy, I'm adding this bit in because I completely forgot about it because I found it when I first had the Rambler here. The one thing you're going to go really, and I genuinely mean go ultra careful upon, is the hinges for both Elevons. Now, one of them you can see in there is broken away there. Okay, the other one literally, oh, you can't see it because I've put film on top of it. This one literally came off in my hand. The seams on the Elevons are absolutely awful. So with that in mind, I did laminate my model, and that's why it's probably held up so well. And there is an extra piece of laminate on there. Failing that, using some Blendum tape would be the perfect solution. But do not use the model au naturel without putting some strengthening along the seam name of the Elevon because they were literally the worst I've ever seen. Click, click, and it came, well, that side, click, click, and it came off in my hand. Okay, so go very, very careful of the seams on your Elevons as well. By the way, not completely unheard of for that to be an issue. It just seemed to be more pronounced with this model. Anyway, let's get back to the topics which we were discussing a moment ago. Staying with the lower part of this model, I mentioned this previously. Those of you who know about this, I am going to quickly recap this. There is a line which goes across here, and you'll see that it goes like that. So it goes across, then comes up to the spar, and then goes across. That is not a good idea. The reason being is that if you put a trench in for your video transmitter or your receiver, for example, and you've been and cut a great big hole in there right next to your main spar, you have unintentionally weakened your model because the spar's underneath there. I don't think that was the best idea, so my suggestion, and it's exactly what I did, is that I just got the soldering iron and a metal ruler and then ran it straight across to these corners here. And you'll notice that it is exactly the same on the opposite side. The suggestion that you should purposefully weaken your model right on the spar, which is, like I said, not a good idea. So run across to these bays on the outside. The bays themselves are quite weak. You'll notice, can you see how much flex is in that wingtip? It is something which I mentioned again when I took a first look at this model, and it has become true. You will definitely want to take some carbon fiber rod or glass fiber rod and strengthen this wingtip across this leading edge and probably back here as well, because as you can see, this wingtip has, and that side's not that bad at the moment, to be honest, but this the right hand wing has definitely taken a few whacks and it really is starting to show now. So you'll definitely want to put a piece of carbon or glass fiber rod in there to stiffen up the wingtips. Now you'll also notice that I laminated this model, and the reason why I laminated this model is because specifically for this issue. And if you think about it, on the top of the wing there is a layer of laminate, so when I push it this way, that laminate should be stopping this wing from doing that, but no, the foam has collapsed somewhat in there, and it's just because that bay which is in there, which you can kind of make out, is so big, it's too close to the wing. And it is basically, so it has been and weakened the wingtip, and as such, really, again, as I mentioned back in the original unboxing and the first look on this one, is that that bay probably needed to be back over here. Again, for antennas going out, if you think about the crossfire, you normally have quite a long wire which is in there, so it would have just been better from a practical point of view to have the bay here somewhere, maybe about there, and then you get to choose where your antenna runs, because that has purposefully weakened the wingtip on the LTE Rambler. So there we go, that is an overview to the front, to the back of the LTE Rambler. I may have already been included some flight footage in this video as well, and it does fly quite well. It's not the best model I've ever flown, but it is definitely not the worst model which I've flown. I have been included some PIDs for you for iNav, and also a complete dump or diff file for all the settings which I had or have in my LTE Rambler RS, and those are in a link in the video description. The same for the FPV camera, and in fact the whole setup, including the motor, the ESC, etc, etc. So if you wanted to duplicate this setup, at least you could see the things which I chose for this model. Again, the Sunny Sky 2216 1250 kV motor, absolutely perfect choice, especially on 4S with an 8x6 propeller. That is a fantastic motor prop in the ESC combo, and it did fly very, very efficiently, and it did fly very well. It was that motor specifically is a really good combo for not only this model but many others, and it gives you that nice range that you can have some efficiency if you want, but you can also have some speed as well, which is great when you need to push through a headwind, for example. So like I said at the very beginning, the LTE Rambler model itself is not a bad model. Even after certain events which have gone on, the model itself does require one or two modifications which I've mentioned. None of these are out of the remits of the average RC modeler. However, this is where we get to the sticky points, which is the brand and one or more of its representatives have purposefully lied, censored, and resorted to calling me personally a racist to try and discredit my view on this model. And the whole experience with the LTE brand has been absolutely appalling. Okay, I am mortified that a reviewer like myself, a fellow RC enthusiast and pilot, could receive so much hate. Is that the right word for it? It might be this. For literally adding 4 centimeters, 1.5 inches of foam to a model to rectify a glaringly obvious flaw with the model. It was indicated by a representative of LTE that hundreds of pilots have flown the LTE Rambler. When this was fact checked, actually this turned out to be complete lies, and nobody, for example, nobody out there before the day of actually recording this video has published any PIDs for iNav, for example, and that, yeah. So the point which I'm trying to make is that the model itself is okay. It's not a bad model, it just requires some modifications. Block up the nose, block up the knacker duct, for example. Get those carbon rods in the nose, otherwise it will snap off. You will definitely want to have a physical restraint on this lid because it likes to pop off for a pastime. The vertical fin at the back does require some modification, and don't forget to stick the pins in the back. And the wingtips are a little bit too flexible, and the servos should have been on the top. I think that's the best summary. Model, you can forgive that for. Some of us just like modifying our models. I'm not a big fan of it, to be perfectly honest, but this one was so easy to modify, I went on and did it anyway so that you could have an enjoyable model should you have purchased this model. However, the brand itself, its representatives, and the experience which I personally have received, and you have seen, those of you who have been along with this journey, has been absolutely appalling. So I will give a half thumbs up for the model. It has a few minor issues. I am definitely giving a thumbs down, and I'm keeping this very polite for the brand LTE. I am not impressed by how they have handled a very minor, in the scheme of things, modification to their model, and it literally went downhill ridiculously fast. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I will put a link in the top right hand corner for you so you can see potentially the saddest day in RC, where a reviewer was basically called a racist because they did not like a modification to their model for something which was glaringly obvious. And I've probably put replays up there in the top left hand corner. You can see that model hunting. There are videos out on the internet which are publicly accessible, which also show models doing exactly the same as that. Not as bad, I hasten to add, but it's glaringly obvious, and suggesting that hundreds of pilots have flown a model when clearly hundreds of kits have not been sold at that point in time does basically boil down to lies, and that's not something which I can impose on you or them, for example. If you want to tell Porky Pies, that's your decision, but please do not involve me in your lies and trying to censor reviewers like myself who genuinely think the model itself not bad, but the level which they went to try and censor a very minor modification to improve its flight characteristics, and remember that flight footage in the top left hand corner, has not been very good, and that's Matt keeping it very, very polite. Now, for the future of the LTE Rambler, I genuinely don't know. I will keep it around for a period of time, but I've got to be perfectly honest with you, really do not like the brand of LTE and everything which I have experienced lately. Although I may end up sticking a rocket in it and we may dispatch it. I don't know. I don't know right now what's going to happen to this model. I don't personally think it's a model which I could personally recommend to you to go on and purchase. Not because the model's a bad one, it's just because everything which goes and now represents for the brand itself. It's not something which I would feel comfortable at night recommending to you, knowing everything which went on with this, and many of you know the story behind that. So I've tried to keep this as politically correct as possible and to keep this as professional as possible, and I'll leave you on the parting words. It's not a bad model, but the brand, highly questionable, not something which I personally want to be associated with ever again, for some of the reasons which you may already know or I have been and alluded to. So there you go, that is the LTE Rambler RS. I sincerely hope that you found this overview and final thoughts on the LTE Rambler helpful to you. If it did, do me a favour, hit the thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments about the LTE Rambler, please let me know in the comments section underneath this video. I would very much value your feedback, especially those of you which know the full story. Have I handled this in an acceptable manner? Again, I would love to know what your thoughts are, and I am definitely doing my best to keep this PC as possible, or family friendly, some might say. From myself, Matt, a big thank you to you for taking the time to join me here at the workbench, and I'll see you again shortly. The LTE Rambler, I don't know what's going to happen with this model.
What the fuck have you done? Whoa!
So with that said, for myself, Matt, thank you for joining me here at the workbench. Wish it could have been on a more positive note. Not a bad model. Them absolute tools. And there's Matt. On that note, cheerios!